Good news today. The latest unemployment total fell to 7.8%. But few in government were rejoicing. They're still smarting from the Governor of the Bank of England's slapdown last night, where he said again Britain needs a more credible path to a balanced budget. Behind the row is the threat that Britain's credit rating, gold-plated since the dawn of time, could be lost. Paul Mason's been meeting the men with the power to pull the plug on Alistair Darling.
There's no point in declaring a state of emergency. We've had, I think, 6 states of emergency in the last few years.
When it comes to the budget deficit, it can feel like Britain's getting flashbacks from every economic bad trip we've ever had.
Today has been an extremely difficult and turbulent day.
I want everyone to understand the gravity of our situation.
Because of the severity of the recession, my forecast for this year's borrowing is £178 billion.
There's an atmosphere of impending crisis, where the city gangs up on Whitehall, where political reality meets financial reality, and the money wins.
It was our duty to fight, to overcome that deficit, to maintain the external value of sterling.
Unless we demonstrate a strong commitment to fiscal sustainability in the longer term, we will have neither financial stability nor healthy economic growth." End quote. The Chancellor has made clear that the spring budget provides the opportunity to do precisely that.
Conventional wisdom says that unless Alistair Darling comes up with a more credible story about Britain's budget deficit, our credit rating will be downgraded. And Mervyn King's comments last night only add to that pressure. But if that moment comes, the decision will be taken effectively by 3 men nobody's ever heard of. So who are they? And are they right? The UK government borrows by issuing long-term IOUs known as gilts. The logic of the sovereign debt market is brutal. The more risky it is to lend to a government, the higher the interest it has to pay. 3 credit rating agencies assess the risk: Standard & Poor's, Moody's and Fitch. These 3 men will decide whether Alistair Darling or his successor has a credible plan. David Riley is head of sovereign risk at Fitch. If push comes to shove, he'll go into a room with his team and come out with bad news for Alistair Darling. So what are the chances of that?
I think it's less than 50%, but I'm not sure it's much less than 50%.
So there's about a 50-50 chance that you will have to downgrade the UK's credit rating.
Well, I'd characterise it as a bit less than 50%, but as I say, not very much less. And I say that because one of the concerns that we have is that UK government debt is set to continue to rise, not just this year and next year, but through to 2014-15.
Are Alistair Darling's plans, as currently written, strong enough and credible enough for you to maintain that rating?
The plans as currently set out over the medium term, we don't think are strong enough to maintain the AAA status.
The metrics agencies use are varied. This graph shows the size of the UK's debt as a proportion of GDP, rising close to 80% in the next 3 years before falling back to 60% long term. But now, look at the interest payments on that debt. They spike a bit and then fall back. And at the rival ratings agency Moody's, that's the figure they focus on, and with a different outlook.
In this context, which again I think is one of the major threats you have, in this context the UK is in a rather good position in a way. Why? Because it has a debt that has a long-term maturity, longer term than most, if all the other countries that we rate. So this is a protection against the risk of an abrupt increase in the long-term interest rates.
For this reason, Moody's is highly unlikely to downgrade Britain's debt. Confused? So, the City is about to go to war with Alistair Darling over his fiscal credibility, and the rating agencies just can't wait to downgrade the UK. Right? Well, actually, it's a lot more complex. There are powerful voices here that think the ratings agencies are irrelevant. What is the chance of the UK defaulting on its sovereign debt?
It's 0.
In fact, I would say the market's focus on the credit rating of the UK is completely false. The UK sovereign does not have a credit risk.
Stephen Major is HSBC's global strategist on sovereign debt. He's scathing about the methodology and the influence of the rating agencies.
The UK can issue freely in its own currency, it can tax in its own currency, it can create money if it needs to. It will never fail to pay the coupons on its bonds.
So what's the point of all this AAA, A-, negative watch? What's the point of it all?
Well, I'm wondering that myself. I'm wondering whether we should listen to the agencies at all.
And it's not just the agency. He believes that when it comes to the UK's deficits, the markets themselves have got it wrong. If you look at what it costs to insure British debt, the graph shows it's much dearer than for other AAA countries like the USA, Germany and France. In fact, it shows the UK trading closer to Portugal with its measly single A+ rating.
I think the market has got this one wrong. To say the market's wrong is a big statement, but I would say that there's too much risk premium associated with the UK. The market is pricing in too much negative news.
Here's why this matters. If the markets get too alarmist about debt, they push the politicians into cuts that are too deep. If the alarmists are right, Gordon Brown should be offering more austerity, less reassurance. And in the city, they're well aware of the dilemma. One pension fund manager who holds billions of pounds worth of government debt put it to me like this. Right now, to protect my pensioners, I'm probably going to force the UK government into austerity. Further down the line, those very pensioners will suffer as health and social care are cut. But I can't help it. That's the logic of the markets, and even here they know they're not always right.